I knew something was wrong the moment 3 HOA board members marched onto my property like they owned the place. They weren't smiling, they weren't friendly, and they definitely weren't here for a neighborly chat. No, these people came armed with clipboards, fake confidence, and a mission to take control of the entire lake behind my home. What they didn't know was that the one thing they were standing on the docks they claimed belonged to the community were actually mine. Every single one of them. And I had the documents to prove it. But before we get to that explosive moment, let me tell you how this chaos began. It started on a quiet Saturday morning. I had just stepped outside with my coffee when I spotted the HOA president, Linda, storming toward me. She had the expression of someone who had already decided she hated whatever words were about to come out of my mouth. Behind her trailed 2 board members, whispering to each other like gossiping school kids. "Good morning," I said, though it came out more like a question. Linda held up a sheet of paper. "We're notifying you of a violation." "A violation of what?" "Unauthorized structures," she snapped. "Specifically, the docks." I stared at her. "My docks? They belong to the association," she said, crossing her arms. "And you're using them without proper permission." Now, at this point, anyone else might have panicked. The HOA had a reputation for bullying homeowners into compliance. They were used to people folding. But I wasn't one of those people. I took the paper from her hand and skimmed it. The entire violation notice was a mess: no legal citations, no signatures, and not even the correct parcel number. It was a bluff. A sloppy one. "You know this is fake, right?" I said. Linda's eyes narrowed into slits. "Are you accusing us of misconduct?" "Oh, I'm doing more than that," I replied. "I'm saying you don't have authority over the lake or the docks. At all." Her jaw clenched so hard I could hear her teeth grind. "We'll see about that," she spat. And that was the moment I realized, they were going to escalate this. They weren't going to stop at a warning. They were determined to take what wasn't theirs unless I stopped them first. Before they even reached the street, I was already inside, unlocking the fireproof safe where I kept the documents they hoped didn't exist. Deeds, surveys, and historical filings, records older than their HOA. If they wanted a battle, they picked the wrong opponent. And I was ready for them all. The moment the HOA board left my property, I opened the safe and pulled out the documents they never imagined I had. Thick, weathered folders containing land surveys from decades before the HOA even existed. Deeds stamped and notarized long before any of the current board members moved into the neighborhood. Records proving one undeniable fact: the lakefront parcels and every dock built on them were privately owned. Not shared. Not community property. Mine. The first document I laid on the table was the original land plat from the developer. It clearly marked the shoreline and dock rights as individually owned parcels. The second document was the transfer deed showing the previous owner had legally transferred those rights to me when I purchased the home. And the third, my favorite, was a letter from the county registrar explaining that the HOA's jurisdiction ended several hundred feet before the dock line. In other words, they had no power there. None. I already knew this. But now they were forcing my hand. If they wanted to challenge ownership, they were about to run straight into a wall of evidence. Just as I finished organizing the files, my phone buzzed. A neighbor texted me, "HOA is at the lake taking photos. Something's up." Of course they were. They thought they could build a case by snapping pictures of structures they claimed belonged to them. What they didn't realize was that every picture they took only documented property that legally belonged to me. I grabbed the documents, slipped them into a waterproof binder, and headed toward the lake. As I approached, I heard Linda before I saw her. She was standing on my main dock, pointing wildly at the water while the secretary scribbled notes like she was solving a murder. "There he is," Linda snapped as soon as she spotted me. "You'll want to hear this. We're filing a formal complaint." These docks were built without our approval. I lifted the binder. Interesting, I said calmly. Because according to the county, you don't have jurisdiction here. Her smirk faded. What are you talking about? I opened the binder slowly, deliberately, like a magician revealing the final trick of a show. These are the original land records. And here I pulled out the deed is the document proving I own every dock you're standing on. The secretary stopped writing. The treasurer's face went pale. Linda blinked, processing the blow. You're lying, she whispered. I handed her a copy. Read it. Out loud. She didn't. She couldn't. Because the truth was written in black and white, with signatures, seals, and dates etched long before the HOA had any say in this community. And this was only the beginning. Linda held the documents like they were radioactive. Her eyes scanned the page, darting left and right, her mouth tightening with every line she read. The other board members leaned in, their confidence melting into nervous confusion. For a moment, just a moment, the lake was quiet except for the sound of water tapping gently against the docks they thought they controlled. Finally, Linda exhaled sharply. These can't be legitimate. They're stamped by the county, I replied. Filed, verified, and certified. You can call them yourself. Her lips twisted as she shoved the paper back into my hand. We'll have our lawyer look at it? You mean the lawyer you hire with HOA funds? I asked. Funds paid by people who don't own these docks. That struck a nerve. Her cheeks reddened. The treasurer looked away, pretending to inspect a screw on the railing. I stepped onto the dock beside them, not aggressively, just close enough to reassert what they refused to accept. This was my property, and they were trespassing. You need to leave, I said. Right now. Linda tried to hold her ground. You don't tell the HOA what to do. I pointed toward the shoreline markers. The county does. And according to them, those markers mean you have no jurisdiction past that point. So unless you want a trespassing complaint filed against you. The secretary practically jumped backward onto the grass. She didn't want any part of that. The treasurer followed her lead, speed walking away without even pretending to maintain dignity. But Linda? She stayed. Her jaw clenched. Her nostrils flared. She wasn't just upset, she was embarrassed. And for someone like her, embarrassment turns into rage. You think you can just wave paperwork around and win, she hissed. We'll find something. Some violation. Some loophole. You are not going to embarrass this association. You embarrassed yourself, I said calmly. By coming onto property you don't own and trying to bully someone into giving it up. She opened her mouth to snap back, but before she could, a voice called out from behind her. Is everything okay here? It was Officer Ramirez, a local patrol officer and someone I knew well enough from community events. He stood with one hand on his belt, assessing the situation. Linda straightened instantly. Officer, good, you need to remove him from HOA property. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. Then he looked down at the dock, then at me, then back at Linda. Ma'am, he said slowly, this dock is listed under his parcel. It's not HOA property. Linda's face went blank. Ramirez continued, if you're here without permission, you may be the one trespassing. For the first time since this started, Linda took a step back. The power shift had begun. Officer Ramirez stood between us, calm but firm, while Linda struggled to compose herself. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for a script, but nothing came out. She wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by law enforcement and definitely not by paperwork she couldn't bully her way around. Ma'am, Ramirez said gently but clearly, I'm going to need you to step back onto HOA property. Linda hesitated, then stomped off the dock with all the grace of a toddler mid-tantrum. She folded her arms and glared at me as if her anger alone could erase the documents in my hand. Ramirez turned to me. "I heard they were making complaints," he said. "I figured I should check in before things escalated." "Already did," I replied. "They're trying to claim ownership of the docks." Ramirez rubbed his forehead. "Even though the county ruled on this years ago." "Exactly." He sighed. "All right. Let's do this officially." He called dispatch and requested the county property inspector, someone who could shut this down with authority the HOA couldn't challenge. Meanwhile, Linda paced back and forth, muttering under her breath about rogue officers and defiant homeowners. About 20 minutes later, a white county truck pulled up. Out stepped Inspector Caldwell, a man who always looked slightly annoyed just by the nature of his job. Clipboards, measuring tools, and laser distance meters clinked at his side. He approached us with the thick, unbothered confidence of someone who had dealt with one too many HOA power trips. "All right," Caldwell said flatly. "What's the issue?" Linda pounced. She jabbed a finger at me. "Constructed docks without approval, and they are on association property. He is in violation of multiple community rules." Caldwell didn't even blink. "Show me your jurisdiction map." Linda froze for a split second, then held out a laminated HOA map. It was colorful, neatly marked, and completely irrelevant to actual county boundaries. Caldwell schemed it for 2 seconds. "This isn't the legal boundary map," he said dryly. "This is an HOA brochure. It's our official document." "It's a flyer," he corrected. He then turned to me. "You got your deed and the shoreline plat?" I handed them over. Caldwell walked to the edge of the dock, comparing the markings with laser precision. Then he checked the parcel numbers. Then he checked them again, just to be absolutely sure. Finally he returned, flipping the clipboard shut. "All right," he said. "These docks are 100% on his privately owned lakefront parcel. HOA has zero jurisdiction here." Linda's face turned a shade of red that belonged on a warning sign. Caldwell continued, "Ma'am, if you continue harassing him over property you don't own, the county may issue penalties." Penalties. The word hit her like a slap. This battle wasn't just turning, it had flipped completely. For a long moment, no one spoke. Inspector Caldwell's ruling hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Linda looked stunned, caught between anger, humiliation, and the creeping realization that she had just been publicly corrected by both law enforcement and a county official. The treasurer avoided eye contact entirely, staring at the grass as if hoping it might swallow him whole. Even the secretary, usually glued to her clipboard, stood frozen with her pen hovering in midair. Caldwell handed me back my documents and snapped his clipboard shut. "I'll file the confirmation with the county before the end of the day," he said. "That should prevent any further misunderstandings." He gave Linda a pointed look before walking back to his truck. Ramirez nodded to me and followed. Within minutes, both vehicles were gone, leaving me with 3 very shaken HOA board members. Linda finally spoke, but her voice had none of its usual sharpness. We were told the association had control over all shared waterfront structures." "By who?" I asked. She hesitated. "The previous board. They always said the docks were community property." That sounded suspicious. I crossed my arms. "Did you ever verify that with the county?" Her silence was answer enough. The truth clicked into place right then. The HOA had been operating under a myth, one passed down through years of assumption and power-hungry leadership. Either someone had lied intentionally, or the current board had inherited misinformation and never bothered to check. Knowing Linda, probably both. But before I could press further, another voice called out from the walking path behind us. "Linda, what did you do?" It was Mark, one of my neighbors, a quiet guy, rarely involved in drama. But today, he was glaring at the board with a frustration I'd never seen from him. "We saw you out here yelling," he said. "Half the neighborhood is talking. Did you seriously try to claim his docks?" Linda stiffened. "This is an internal HOA matter. Not when you trespass onto private property," Mark shot back. "Not when you threaten someone over land we all knew he owned." Linda's eyes widened. "You knew?" "Everyone knew," he said. "The real estate agent told us when we bought our place. It's in the disclosure packets." The treasurer muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, "I told you we should have checked." For the first time, Linda looked genuinely unsure of herself. Her authority, her weapon of choice, was slipping through her fingers. "I decided it was time to put the final nail in the coffin. Linda," I said calmly, "I'm willing to move past this. But if you or the board continue to harass me, I'll file formal complaints with both the county and the HOA Oversight Committee." She stared at me, stunned silent. Because she knew I wasn't bluffing. I walked into the emergency HOA meeting with the confidence of someone who already knew the final score of the game while everyone else was still arguing about the rules. The board sat in their usual positions, Robert at the center like a self-appointed king, Marlene armed with her color-coded binder of nonsense violations, and the HOA attorney flipping through papers he clearly hadn't reviewed closely enough. Around the room, residents filled the chairs, whispering among themselves. Some were hopeful. Some were annoyed. Most were simply exhausted from months of the board's harassment, threats, and absurd control tactics. They had all gathered to witness the showdown the HOA was convinced they would win. Little did they know the script had flipped long before they walked in. Robert opened with his usual performative authority. "We're here today to address Mr. Carter's refusal to comply with lake access regulations," he declared, puffing up his chest. "His refusal to follow community rules has forced us to take legal action." "That's interesting," I cut in before he could finish the speech he'd clearly rehearsed in the mirror. "Because the legal action you filed didn't include a single legitimate claim to ownership of the docks." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Robert glared at me. "Everything we've done is fully within our rights." "No," I said calmly, placing my leather folder on the table and opening it. "Actually, nothing you've done is within your rights." Marlene scoffed. "Oh please. Your little folder isn't going to change decades of established HOA authority." "Really?" I asked, sliding out the first document. "Let's start with the county plat map. The real one, not the outdated copy you wave around at meetings." The attorney shifted uncomfortably. I held the map up so the projector could display it behind me. The room leaned forward. Bright red markings showed every dock, walkway, access path, and next to them, a single name. Mine. "So what?" Robert barked. "The lake belongs to the community. You can't just claim." "I'm not claiming anything," I replied. "I'm showing you what the county recorded 32 years ago when the previous owner subdivided the shoreline. He kept deeded ownership of every structure, and when I purchased the property, I inherited every single right he had." Marlene's jaw actually dropped. The attorney stopped flipping pages. He finally realized this was not a debate, it was a disaster. But I didn't stop. I pulled out the next file, older, thicker, sealed with the county registrar's stamp. "And this," I said, placing it gently on the table, "is the easement contract your HOA never knew existed because none of you ever bothered to check the historical filings. It explicitly states that the HOA receives no claim, no authority, and no governance over any dock or lakeside structure. Ever." The room exploded in murmurs. Robert's face went red. "This is ridiculous. We control the lake." "You control the land the homeowners live on," I corrected. "You don't control the water. You don't control the shoreline. And you definitely don't control the structures someone else legally owns." The attorney leaned over to Robert and whispered urgently, "We may need to reevaluate." Robert shoved him away. "No. He's bluffing. I slid out one last paper, the one that would destroy every argument they had left. I haven't even begun, I said quietly. The room fell silent. Because this document, I continued, tapping the page, is the one that proves the HOA has been trespassing on my property for years. The attorney's eyes widened. Marlene froze. Even Robert stopped breathing for a moment. I wasn't just winning. I had the receipts that proved they never had a case at all. For a few seconds, the room stayed perfectly still. You could have heard a pin drop or, in this case, the sound of an entire HOA board's confidence collapsing. Every resident watched, wide-eyed, waiting for someone on the board to say something. But for the first time since I'd moved into the neighborhood, they had nothing. I placed the final document flat on the table, sliding it directly toward the HOA attorney. He swallowed hard as he scanned the first few lines. His eyebrows lifted. His lips parted. And then he leaned back slowly, as if the weight of the problem was suddenly too heavy to hold upright. This is a problem," he muttered under his breath. Robert snapped. "What do you mean a problem? We're the HOA. We have jurisdiction over the lake." "No, you don't," I replied calmly. "Not according to the easement contract from 1992. Not according to the county. And not according to the original shoreline developer's filings." I tapped the paper lightly. "And definitely not according to the trespass ruling from 2004. Marlene nearly choked. "Trespass ruling?" I nodded. "Yes. It states that all docks and lake structures were privately owned and protected from unauthorized regulation or interference. Meaning any attempt to enforce HOA rules on them," I paused, letting the words hang over the crowd, "would constitute trespassing." The attorney lifted his head. "He's right." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Robert stared at him. "You're siding with him." "I'm not siding with anyone," the attorney said, voice tight. "I'm telling you that continuing this case could expose the HOA to significant liability." Marlene clutched her binder as if it were a life raft. "We can't let him control the lake. People expect us to enforce order." I turned toward the residents seated behind me, the very neighbors the HOA claimed to be protecting. "Do you feel like the HOA has brought order?" I asked. "Or has it brought stress? Fines? Threats? Harassment?" A woman in the second row whispered, "Finally, someone said it." A man in the back stood up. "They fined me for having a kayak tied up on his dock." He pointed at me. "They said it violated community lake codes." Another resident muttered, "I got fined for letting my kid fish on property he apparently owns." The tension in the room shifted. No longer aimed at me. Squarely aimed at the board. Robert slammed his hand down on the table. "This meeting is out of order. Nobody speaks unless recognized." "Oh, this meeting is very in order," I replied. "Because I'm formally notifying the HOA that any continued interference with my property, any dock, walkway, or lake access will result in legal action on my side. And this time," I leaned forward, "the county will be backing me, not you." Marlene's face drained of color. The attorney cleared his throat. "We need time to review this." "You've had years," I said. "I've only had this evidence for days and I still found more in a week than you did in a decade." The residents murmured again. A small, older man in the front row spoke up hesitantly. "So, does this mean the HOA never owned the lake?" I turned to him. "Not 1 inch of shoreline. Not one plank of a dock. Not one policy they've ever tried to enforce out there is legally binding." He exhaled shakily. "My God." Robert slammed the table again. "We're not shutting down this case. I refuse. Our authority is gone," I finished. The attorney didn't even bother defending him. He stood from his seat and quietly began gathering his papers. "I recommend the board recess immediately." Privately. Robert looked betrayed. "You're leaving." "I'm protecting my license," the attorney replied bluntly. The room buzzed with shock. Marlene desperately flipped through her binder, tearing through pages as if the answers were hiding between the lines. "This can't be happening. This can't." But it was. Everything they'd built, their pride on, their control, their rules, their false power, was unraveling in front of the entire neighborhood. And I wasn't finished yet. The HOA board retreated into the small conference room behind the podium, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the blinds. Through the frosted glass, the silhouettes of Robert and Marlene waved and gestured wildly, their voices muffled but unmistakably frantic. The attorney paced slowly inside, clearly regretting every professional decision that led him to this moment. Meanwhile, the residents who stayed in the meeting hall gathered around me, firing questions in stunned disbelief. "So the HOA never had any control over the lake? You mean they fined us illegally? Can we get our money back?" I raised my hands gently. "One thing at a time, everyone. Let's wait for them to come back out. They need to acknowledge the documents formally." But even as I said it, I knew they weren't going to take this calmly. They'd spent years lording their fake authority over the entire community. Losing it wasn't just a legal defeat, it was personal. And people like them didn't let go easily. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Finally, the door swung open. Robert emerged first. His jaw was tight, his eyes bloodshot with anger, and his face flushed a deep, furious red. Marlene followed behind him, lips pursed so tightly they practically disappeared. The attorney trailed after them, carrying the burden of truth like a weight pressing into his spine. Robert marched right to the center of the room, puffed up like a man trying to reclaim an ego that had already evaporated. After reviewing the documents, he paused, eyes narrowing at me. "The board finds them suspicious, incomplete, and likely forged." Gasps erupted from the residents. I froze for a second, not because I was afraid, but because I was genuinely shocked by how far he was willing to go to avoid accepting reality. "You're calling county documents forged?" I asked calmly. Robert jabbed a finger toward me. "I'm calling you a liar. You think you can waltz in here with a stack of dusty papers and overturn decades of community rules? We're not falling for it." Marlene crossed her arms. "We believe the original developer intended the lake to be communal property, regardless of what these files claim." Their attorney cleared his throat. "Board, let's be careful." "Quiet," Robert snapped at him. "We're making the decision." A man in the third row stood up. "I want to see the documents he brought. If the county confirms them, then the HOA has no right to override that." "Sit down," Marlene barked. The room exploded with frustration. I didn't need to raise my voice. I simply lifted my phone and pressed play on a recorded voicemail, the one from the county registrar, confirming the chain of ownership. The room went silent. The attorney turned slowly toward the board, horror washing over his face. You knew the county verified it?" Robert swallowed hard. I took a step forward. "This isn't suspicion. This isn't debate. This is proof. And you're out of excuses." Residents murmured angrily, now no longer confused, but turning against the board. Robert's composure cracked. Marlene clutched her binder like a shield. And the power they held over the neighborhood finally started to crumble. The room surged with a new energy, anger, disbelief, and long-buried resentment rising to the surface like a tide finally breaking free. Residents stood from their seats, no longer intimidated by the board that had bullied them for years. Robert, for the first time since I'd met him, looked genuinely unsettled. His authority, once absolute, was slipping through his fingers faster than he could grasp it. Marlene clutched her binder so tightly her knuckles turned white, as if the color-coded tabs might somehow save her. The attorney hovered behind them, clearly realizing he was trapped between his client's stubbornness and the undeniable truth. This is outrageous. Robert finally shouted over the growing noise. He manipulated the system, he cheated. The lake has always been community property. A woman from the back row stepped forward, shaking with anger. You fined my family $800 for having our kayaks tied on one of his docks. You threatened to suspend our access. What do you call that? Robert opened his mouth but nothing came out. Another resident chimed in. Your rules were based on lies. You never had authority over the shoreline. Ever. The board now faced an entire room of people who refused to look away. I pulled out one last document, not a map, not a deed, not a centuries-old filing. This one was fresh. Clean. Official. I'm submitting this to the county at 9 a.m. tomorrow, I said. It's a trespass claim. Because your HOA built signage, patrol stations, and enforcement structures on land that doesn't belong to you. Marlene gasped, nearly dropping her binder. Why you can't do that? I can, I said quietly. And after years of harassment, I will. The attorney rushed forward. Let's all calm down, this can be negotiated. No, a group of residents said at once. Robert tried again to rally. You're making a mistake, all of you. Without the HOA controlling the lake, the community will fall into chaos. The only chaos, I said, is the one you created by pretending you had power you never earned. Then, in a moment I never expected, the residents turned on the board in unison. I motioned to remove the current HOA board for misconduct, one man declared. I second that, another said. Robert's head whipped around. You can't. Yes, the attorney said reluctantly, they can. Hands shot into the air, dozens of them. A majority. Robert's face drained of color. Marlene slowly lowered herself into a chair, staring blankly at her useless binder. The attorney exhaled deeply, as if relieved that the nightmare was finally ending. And just like that, the people who had tried to steal a lake lost everything instead. As the meeting dispersed, several residents approached me, thanking me not just for exposing the truth, but for ending the reign of fear that had ruled the neighborhood for years. Outside, the lake was calm. Still. Mine, not because I hoarded it, but because it had legally belonged to my property long before any HOA existed. The difference now? Everyone finally knew the truth. And the people who tried to take it from me had been exposed in front of the entire community. Their power was gone. Their lies dismantled. Their lake? It had never been theirs at all.